This session features Sarah Arthur, who is author of 10 books ranging from popular devotionals to serious engagement with literature and narrative. Among her most recent titles are Between Midnight and Dawn, At the Still Point, and Light Upon Light. A graduate of Wheaton College and Duke University Divinity School, she has served in full-time and volunteer youth ministry for over 20 years. Sarah was also the most highly rated speaker at our writers' workshop at Princeton Seminary recently. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us today.
You're welcome, Brian. I didn't want to unmute myself too soon and have extra chatter in the background. Thanks for having me. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get rolling. It's really fun to be with you all. I've never done a webinar before, either as a participant or as a presenter. So your feedback is going to be super helpful and important, especially to Brian as he continues rolling with these. So thanks for your patience as we get started. I don't know how I ended up with the warm-up act for Rachel Held Evans later on today, but I'll take it. I think that's totally fine, totally fun. So the topic for this webinar is the 10 tips on getting it done. And the basic format is I'm going to present for about 45 minutes with my top 10 tips on getting your writing done. And you're going to probably want something to write with in front of you. So a notebook, or if you're just toggling back and forth between screens, or on a tablet. So you're going to want something in front of you to write with, so that because we don't have a handout. So you're going to need that. And I'm going to toggle back and forth between myself and just some PowerPoint slides to enhance what I'm talking about. And then at the end, we're going to have about 15 minutes of Q&A. And so Brian's going to moderate those, and you can just add your question into the chat section of the webinar, and then Brian will relay those questions, just some highlights, or he'll consolidate some questions and relay those to me. So that's the format, and we're going to go ahead and dive in. So this topic is not necessarily one about which I have a natural ability. Just my caveat here, I am not naturally inclined towards getting my writing done. And just in case you're wondering if that's in fact true, since I have published 11 books, I'm going to show you the one of the many little books that I created as a child. So here you can see I've been writing for a long time. This is me at about age 7.5 to 8. I would take pieces of paper and I would staple them together, and on the front cover I would design cover art, and on the inside I would create a title page complete with invented publishing houses. And this is one of those. As you can see, I was not at all influenced by Little House on the Prairie. And what I find interesting about this one, and we have dozens of them in my family home, dozens in our archives, is you'll notice in the top left corner the little number 1. So clearly I had high hopes for this being a series. Yes, so high hopes that I would in fact finish this and move on to more in this series. But then when I found this, I laughed so hard. On the very inside inscription of this book is this little caveat. I am 7.5 years old, going into 3rd grade. I start books but never finish them. So even at age 7.5, I had this awareness that I'm not necessarily naturally inclined towards getting my writing done. So this is a lifelong problem for me. So everything that I'm sharing today are skills that I've learned over time. So my first book came out in 2003, and I had, this is not a joke. So I had conversations with the publisher over the course of about 2 weeks, submitted sample material, and was told that I had a deadline of 2 months to finish the book. Two months to finish the book for somebody who had never, in fact, actually finished a book. I'm not sure why this publisher even took a chance on me, but it was amazing. I got the book done, and I learned along the way what kinds of things work for me, and a lot of those I'm going to share with you. So I've been in this, 15, 16 years, and with starting writing curriculum for denominational publishing houses and trying to meet those deadlines. And so I'll be sharing just skills I've learned along the way. But but most of us have something that is in us that we want to do or must do as writers. Most of us have, like, if you think today, okay, if I were to die in a fiery car crash, which is an awful thought, but if you were, what would you regret not having finished? What would you regret not having done? Maybe it's a deadline that you actually have or a contract that you have to finish. Maybe it's a project that you've just had in you for a long time to do. What would you regret not having finished? And so I would write that question. That's the first thing you're going to write down in this webinar. What is it that I must do? What is the thing that I must get done? For me, it's a novel that I've been working on for 14 years. Yes, 14 years. This is from a woman who has published 11 books. You would think that I would have it finished by now, but I have not. So for you, what is that? What is that thing? So go ahead and write that down. And then the second thing that I want you to write down is, why are you not getting it done? What are your reasons for not getting it done? What's keeping you from getting it done? For a lot of us, the first thing that comes to mind are usually external things, stuff outside of our life that's kind of been pressing in on our lives, on our writing lives, whether it's other work or other deadlines or family issues. And just to give you a little sneak peek of why I'm not getting my writing done, this would be my excuse. There are my two questions. There he is. This is my excuse for not getting my writing done. That is my oldest son, Micah, when he was 2.5. This was about 6.7 seconds after I invited him to come work with me in my office while I was writing. You can see I had set up a little table for him with crayons and paper, and that was his little workspace. And then I had my desk and my workspace. And but right off the bat, what did he discover but the box of bubble wrap? Like, why I thought it was a good idea to have this in the office, I have no idea. But he discovered this very early on, maybe about 3 seconds into our morning working together. And this is what my office looked like shortly thereafter. So those of you who might glamorize the work at home mom, I've now demythologized that for you. So those of you with babies, this is your future. This is your future. That's my excuse, right? So a lot of us have an external excuse, something outside of us that is impinging on our writing time, whether it's caring for a family member or raising children, or maybe there are health issues in your family right now, or job transitions or moving. There's always something that we list. So what is it for you? What is keeping you from getting it done? You can go ahead and write that down or reflect on it throughout the course of our talk or later on today. But really, like, if you think about the fact that from the time I was 7, I struggled with this, the things that were keeping me from getting it done when I was 7.5 are not the same things that are keeping me from getting it done now. So it's not the external things in the end that I think are the problem. Most of the time, there is something in us. There's something it's internal things that are keeping us from getting it done. So I'm going to read to us from, when I say us, I mean every time I read this, it has an impact on me. From Frederick Buechner's The Alphabet of Grace. And it's a lovely book if you haven't read it. He's a great spiritual writer, a minister, a mentor. And he's writing about, this is when his children were young. And so he and his wife have gotten them out the door, and he is headed off to go write. And he has found a spot in a church where he regularly writes in a Sunday school classroom. And so he's getting ready to sit down and pick up where he left off in a novel. And this is what he has to say. Then, as so often happens, just as I am ready to start writing, knowing pretty much what I want to say and excited about finding a way to say it well, something in me tries to get up and leave it. to drink a glass of water, look out the window, read a magazine. Just as the spell has a chance of working, I break it. Just as there is a chance of bringing light out of dark, I choose the dark. Withdraw my hand from the hand I have reached out for. If sleep is good for the sleeping children, does that mean that life is bad for them, bad for my old man and for me? If there is a will towards speaking and life, is there a will also towards silence and death? So that each morning you have your choice whether to wake or not to wake. If there is a will to be known and forgiven, is there a will also to remain hidden? Yes, of course, but the full answer about why I both want to write and do not want to write lies deeper still. And were I to discover it, I would discover perhaps the secret name written on the white stone. I do not discover it. But this morning, at least, I resist the temptation to leave my work before I have begun it. For better or worse, I choose this time for life instead of death. For better or worse, I choose this time for life instead of death. There is something in us that resists the call of God to do good work. It's just the human predicament, and it applies to writing as it applies to many other things that we know we need to do, but we are not doing. And part of it, I think, is the mystique of writing as a craft, as an art form, as this mysterious process that's just going to kind of strike us, right? That we're going to suddenly have this inspiration. And that mystique, I think, is kind of paralyzing because in all other areas of our life, or in many other areas of our life, we are fully competent adults at getting things done, right? So let's say I have to get some errands done. And so I have a process for how I'm going to get my errands done. And you could think of various different areas in your life, right? Where, you're going to try to get something done. And you get to the end of it and you've actually accomplished this. Fully competent adult. You can, you know exactly the process that it's going to take to be able to get this done. And somehow we seem unable to apply those same skills from every other area of our life to the process of writing. So let's just take, like running errands. Okay, I was going to think of like mowing my lawn or something, but we'll do running errands. So what does it take to get that done? Well, often I will, let's say I have 4 or 5 errands to run. I will write a list because I'm a little spacey. And I will bomb right by the bank because I'm thinking of something else. So I write down what I have to do. I make a list. And then I will map out my route based on where things are near my house or where I have to pick up the kids or whatever. So I will plan ahead what I'm going to do, and I will have a good sense of what I can get done in a certain amount of time. All right, I'll realize when I'm going to be biting off more than I can chew. And I'm going to say, okay, well, if I have time, I'll add this, and if I don't get to it, great. Right? I'll plan ahead, like I'll check to see if the bank is open, for instance, or any other kind of things that I would do to get that done. Right. So these are all skills that I apply to running errands. And if for some reason I show up at the bank, it's Labor Day, I forgot, and it's closed, I don't say, oh, I am the worst errand runner. Why did I ever think I should be running errands? This is the worst day of my life. I'm never going to try to do this again. No. We just move on. We say, okay, so the bank is closed, so I'm going to come back tomorrow. But for some reason, when it comes to writing, even the smallest setback, whatever it may be, like I lost a paragraph, even the smallest setback makes us question our existence, makes us wonder if we're really supposed to be writers. And even the tiniest things can make us feel like skilled, unskilled, immature, people who are not called to this. So I'm going to give you now my top 10 tips for getting it done. And be thinking about all those other areas of your life where you're skilled at this, and see if you can begin to translate some of those into the task of completing whatever it is that you have in front of you to do. All right. So because we don't have a handout, I'm going to go ahead and put these up on the screen. We're going to skip that for further reflection part. Could do that some other time. All right. So for me, one key thing that had to happen, that had to shift for me, and you'll want to write these down. The first one was to prioritize your writing as more than just a hobby. This was really important for me because for so many years, especially as a middle schooler or teenager, writing was just a hobby. Like if people ask me what kinds of things do you like to do, I didn't think of it as a job, as what I would want to do when I grow up. I mean, your proper answer was supposed to be like you wanted to be a teacher or, you know, I don't know, librarian. But writer was just kind of out there. But for some of us, we need to prioritize our writing as more than just a hobby. So what does that mean? Well, for some of you, you need to have a space in your house or a designated laptop or device on which to write. And some of you, you got this down, but some of you, you're still sharing your computer with other people in your household. You don't necessarily have a designated area that is your writing space. So I would highly encourage you to do that, because professional writers do that. That's what we do. We have an office. It's eclipsed by small people in my house a lot, but I have an office. It's designated space. And if I didn't have that office, I would try to carve out somewhere in my living room or whatever that is my space to write. And then I also would carve out time. If I'm going to prioritize this as more than just a hobby, I'm going to say, okay, at certain points of the week, I need to be working. And so that's another way to do it. I mean, some people who have key hobbies think nothing of spending money on these hobbies, whether it's quilting or golfing. I mean, they're willing to spend money on this, but a lot of times writers are like, it's just a hobby. Like, why would I spend money on this particular writing software? Or why would I spend money on an in-person writing conference? You've already taken the step of attending a webinar, which is like a conference in your living room. And that's important. You're recognizing that you need to invest in this. And if people are willing to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on their hobbies, then certainly you need to think of writing as something even more vital than just a hobby for you. All right, so there are a couple of different things. If you have not yet created a blog or a website, that's even if you don't go public with it yet, it's a really good practice as saying to yourself, I am a writer. This is what I do. When somebody asks you on an airplane or wherever you are, what do you do? If some of you have careers other than writing, often you'll mention that career. You'll say, I am a teacher, I am a pastor, I am a lawyer, whatever it is. And so I challenge you, maybe your next step this month is to say, I'm a writer, and then see what happens. See where the conversation goes from there. Somebody who has golf as a hobby is not going to say they're a golfer. So for you to say, I'm a writer, is to claim that this is something that you are being called to do as a vocation, even if it is not currently or ever will be your career. It is still a calling. So a couple other steps: you can make business cards. My first writing conference that I went to, I totally BS my way through that with hand. Like, I printed these things on my home computer, and I don't think it was a dot matrix, but it was close. And they looked like they were printed on my home computer. But man, I was determined to go looking like I was a writer, man. And I even had a resume and a little bio that I had created. So if you're headed off to a conference and you are wanting to take this up to the next level, then to have something as simple as a business card through Vistaprint or whatever. If only Vistaprint had been around when I went to my first conference. It makes you look more professional than you really are, but we'll be getting professional more and more as we go along. Okay, so that was number one, was to prioritize this as more than just a hobby. Some of you have this down. But some of us need that reminder. Okay, so the second thing is you need to set aside designated writing time. or make an appointment with yourself. And I mentioned this before as part of taking this more seriously than you would a hobby. But to set aside designated writing time, stick to it like you would to a doctor's appointment. Right? This is really crucial. This is vital not only to your sense of call, but to maybe to your spiritual health to be writing. So when will that time be? I mean, be thinking over the next month, like what would that designated writing time be? Anne Lamott is so good about this. I mean, she calls it a debt of honor. You have a debt of honor to fulfill. And the question she always asks is, what am I going to do with this one precious day? What am I going to do with this one precious day? And then Annie Dillard, one of my favorite quotes from her of all time is, how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. If I have spent my entire day not getting my writing done, then I will have spent my entire life not getting my writing done. That is harrowing when I think about it. That is harrowing. So some of the things that I do to set aside designated writing time is now that my 5-year-old's in kindergarten, I have my 3-year-old in daycare 2 days a week. And this kind of rips out my heart. But I keep telling myself, this is not a hobby. This is what I do. This is what I do for a living. I'm a working mom. And so my child will be in daycare. He's 3 doors down from my house. Okay. So it's not like, I'm carting everybody all over the city. But I set aside that time for writing or doing webinars, right, Brian? Or I'm doing webinars. So we have that time. And then my whole family gets on board with that, right? My husband has to agree. Yes, this is more than just a hobby. This is part of your calling. And he affirms that. And so that's part of the designated time. So what is it for you? Maybe it's you're getting up half hour earlier to write for a little bit before you go off to work. Maybe it's a space of time over the weekend. You carve out just Saturday mornings is your time to write, or Sunday evenings, whatever it is. There's a new thing that we've started to do in my family, which is, especially when I have a deadline, but even if I have a particular writing goal I want to meet, I will go away for what we call my writing retreats. And we try to schedule these 3 or 4 times a year, where I just leave town. Literally, like we ask one of our sets of parents to come in to help Tom with the kids, and I leave. And there are a couple of places I go. If you have like a Catholic retreat center in your area, they often will provide a room or a space for very minimally, sometimes just for donations. So in Southern Michigan, I go to the Francis de Sales Center that has hermitages. Like they were designed, I think, for writers. Seriously, a hermitage. You go, it's like your own little cottage. There's a bed, there's a little couch, there's a desk and a chair, and there's a teeny kitchen. And basically they understand that you're not going to talk to anybody else who happens to be on campus. Like you're a hermit. That's your job. Oh, it's amazing. I love it. And then sometimes I'll go to where my parents live. I'll bring the boys, drop them off with them, and they have friends who have a cottage, and I'll stay there and write. All of these are just building within my networks and in my area, just kind of checking out what's out there. Sometimes that's what we have to do, set aside designated writing time. Because writing doesn't just happen. You've probably figured that out by now. But writing doesn't just happen. Okay, so the third thing in my tips of stuff to do to get your writing done is accountability. And some of you maybe have never even told your family or friends that you're writing, or that this is what you have some project in your heart or on your mind that you want to do before you die. That seems like a pretty important thing to tell the people you love, that you have this thing that you want to complete before your life is over. And so tell people that you're working on something. Tell people that you're writing and why it's important, and have them help you carve out that time and keep you accountable to it. Maybe you're in a writing group, or you would like to be. You can do that. Look through meetup.com, see if there are writing groups in your area. It may be hit or miss. There may be some really awful ones out there. There may be some really good ones out there. See what's out there. You can get online. And there are various different writing groups that you can find through different writing networks. Writer's Digest has some of them. And that accountability where people are planning on you showing up having written something is a pretty decent motivator. Is a pretty decent motivator. Or some key friends that you say to them, please ask me how my writing is going. And knowing that they're going to be asking you is that alone is the motivation. That alone is the motivation to keep on with what you're doing. I have a friend named Kristen who is also a mom of young kids, and she's a friend of mine from church who has a day job, and she's very busy with that, but she writes fiction, and she's really good at it. And so one of our commitments as friends is a writing date once a month, which like I can probably hear her laughing in the background because I can't remember the last time we actually pulled that off with small kids in kindergarten and first grade. But we will meet for dinner. We'll talk for about an hour. And then we open up our laptops, we put in our earbuds, and we write. And the commitment is that I cannot work on nonfiction or articles or updating my website at that point. I have to work on fiction. That's what I have to work on. All the novels that I have not finished. That's my task. And so that accountability is so good. I know for certain that she is counting on me to show up and to write at least once a month. So that accountability is important. And just for laughs, I found this on Twitter, and it was really funny. Caitlin Beatty, the managing editor of Christianity Today, was in my seminar at Princeton when I presented on this, and she tweeted this, and it went crazy. It is so funny. The many faces of being asked, how is the writing going? There you go. She was in the middle of trying to finish a book at that point, A Woman's Place, and she was really stressed out, and this was good cathartic laughter for her. So your goal is, depending on what it doesn't matter what your face looks like when people ask you, but your goal is to have people actually ask you, how is the writing going? So maybe that's a next step for you, is to find two people that you're going to say, hey, I want you to ask me that. I want you to ask me that. Okay, number 4. The fourth tip for me that's been super important and super helpful is to think like a binder or a scrapbook, to think of your writing as if it's a binder or a scrapbook, not like a finished book. To think as if this is a binder, not like a finished book yet. So I think a lot of us get paralyzed with thinking that we have to start with the very first sentence of the book and write chronologically till we get to the very last sentence of the book, and that it's got to be coherent from start to finish in between. But most of us we just don't operate that way. We don't operate with a fully formed book in our minds. Instead, we have a hodgepodge of ideas. We have miscellaneous scenes, miscellaneous characters. We have memories. We have lists. Some of us have images, snippets of dialogue. We have maybe it's like a video online that's prompted us, and we want to keep that in a file somewhere. And all of those things just can become this kind of jumbled mess. And you may think of those as not being your book, like the book is yet to be written. But I want you to think of those as your book. I want you to think of those as the book in process. And if you think of it as a binder, you can begin to organize that binder in ways that help you begin the writing process. And because it's a binder, it gives you the freedom to move things around. So let's say you've written a section of chapter 2. Okay, it's a section of chapter 2. So just slide it in there, whether it's an actual binder or a virtual binder. And here is one writing program that has been immensely helpful for me. Some of you may recognize this as Scrivener. This is a screenshot from the Scrivener writing program from my file for putting together the book Light Upon Light, which is an anthology for Advent and Christmas, a literary guide to prayer. And in that book, I have excerpts from all kinds of poetry and fiction by other authors. Part of my biggest job for that was getting publishers' permission for the stuff that's not in the public domain. But what you see is a section of Scrivener that includes the introduction to the book. But the left-hand part of the screen is the most important part here, and that is the binder. So if you've ever worked in Scrivener and love it as much as I do, you can be like, yes, this saved my life. So they actually call it the binder right there. And you can see right up top is the front matter to the book, and I have that file open. You can see the introduction is the part that's open, but I can click on any of these at any point. It'll show you the title page. Because this is a screenshot, I can't right now. And it can show you the different sections of that front matter. And then down here is the section for Advent, all the readings for Advent. You can see how the Christmas one is open, and it shows you all the different weeks or events throughout Christmas. So Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, first Sunday after Christmas, and the week that follows it. And under each of these folders are the different excerpts and got the outline for prayer that I have there. Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, and then the back matter, which is all things like the end notes and the index, the closing thoughts, etc. So you'll notice right down here under research, I've got my proposal notes. I have a sample manuscript. Under excerpts, I have lists of ideas, opening and closing prayers. This is a virtual binder. And another thing to notice is over here, you can change your view of what you can see in this so that it's not just individual sections, but sometimes you can so right now it's under synopsis and the view is general, but you can change. It even has a cork board feature, which shows each of your sections as 3x5 cards that you can move around. It's genius. So I can take the introduction and I can just lift it up and put it somewhere else. And so it's just like a binder. I can move things around and I'm not locked into my stuff being where it is all the time in a book, like where I just feel like, okay, but this is chapter 2 and it's always got to be chapter 2. It doesn't. Think like a scrapbook or a binder instead. Okay, I spent way too much time on that. I'm going to move ahead. All right, so the next thing that I want you to do is I want you to think in chunks. Okay, and this again is where Scrivener is helpful, or a writing program like that. I want you to think in small chunks instead of like, I've got to finish chapter 2. Well, what if you just finish this one section of chapter 2, this particular scene or this particular argument in what you're trying to present? That some people do this with word counts, right? I'm not even going to put that up there on the screen, number 5. Think in small chunks. Some people do it with word counts. So Hemingway's famous for 600 words a day. Some people do page numbers. Stephen King will talk about 10 pages a day. I can't even imagine doing 10 pages a day. Wow. Yes, I just saw that on my notes and kind of did a moment. I had a moment. But in short, like, give yourself permission to skip ahead. If there's a scene in your head that's really clear, go for it. You know, if there is a chapter later on that you know is like, it's just set in your mind, write that instead. But think of those things not necessarily chronologically. You can arrange them later and finish them into a polished whole. Again, Scrivener is really good for this. You'll notice, yeah, I have this all broken down. So, okay, so the 6th thing, and this is obvious, many of you know this already. You would think that I would know this already, but the 6th thing in my top 10 tips is to set deadlines. Now, you know, the really motivating thing for me when I first became a published author was I had a legal contract by which a manuscript was due. And the overachiever in me was like, ooh, I got to turn that in. I got to fulfill my contract, which of course was legally binding. And I got paid when I turned it in. So that was super motivating as well. But, you know, and that's kind of the genius of something like, some of you have maybe heard of NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, which happens every November. People set a goal of writing a 50,000 word novel in a month. And so what's the word count for that? Well, it's roughly 1,600 words a day. But you've got Thanksgiving in there and a time change. So be gracious with yourself, but you've got, you know, 30 days to write this novel. And that's a pretty good deadline. You know, I'm going to draft this sucker 50,000 words in a month. Are they wonderful 50,000 words? No, they may not be wonderful, but you will have at least drafted your novel in a month. That's kind of crazy. I did that one year and it was crazy, but it was fun. It was really good because otherwise I was not getting my fiction writing done. I just wasn't. So maybe you don't have like an obvious deadline. Maybe you need to join a writer's group where the deadline of submitting stuff to the group is really important. Maybe you need to take a class, and in that class you have deadlines of stuff you have to turn in. Maybe that's the motivation that you need. Maybe you know you're going to an in-person writing conference and you want to have material on hand in case somebody asks you, what are you writing? What are you doing? And you can say, oh, I'm actually working on something, and you're not talking BS, like you actually are working on something. And maybe you even have sample material with you. So you've set the writing conference as a deadline for yourself to have some material done. For some of you, it may have to be a life event is like a benchmark. Okay, so when my son is done with first grade, I want to have finished this novel. Oh, I hope it's before then. But maybe it's by the time I'm 50, or by when this happens, like a certain life event becomes a benchmark. The end of the summer, the end of the school year, by the time you retire, so that you're not just saving it for retirement. What would be the sort of natural events that could become a benchmark deadline for you? Okay, I get chatty, so I'm gonna keep moving on. All right, number 7 is to hold your work loosely. If you hear nothing else of what I'm saying, this is probably my most important point, to hold your work loosely. This is actually a spiritual point in a lot of ways, because I've been stuck so many times in my writing, and I've had to remind myself that no combination of words should have so much power that it casts a spell even over me, over my own self, my own words that would have that much power to bind me and to keep me from moving forward. No combination of words should have that power. In the name of Jesus, no combination of words should be able to bind you. So if there's a paragraph that you're really stuck, and it's like, it's such a good paragraph, I can't cut this paragraph, it's such a good paragraph. If you've ever heard the phrase that you need to kill your darlings, this is one of those moments. You may have to take that paragraph, and I know editing for some of you is like ripping out your heart and watching it bleed all over the computer, but you may have to get rid of it. It should not have so much power to bind you. And that may be just getting rid of that part that's not working, maybe what you need to keep moving along and finishing something. There's part of a chapter that I'm working on right now, and I know exactly what it is that has to go. And I just know. And so what I will do, and I've done this so many times in my other work too, is I'm going to give it a timeout. Because I can't kill my darlings. I can't do it. So I'm going to give it a timeout. I'm going to lift that sucker out of there and put it in its own little document, or in Scrivener, remember that little section called notes? I'm going to dump it down in there. And I'm going to say, you get a timeout for a while so mommy can breathe, and I'm going to get back into this project. And so that may be what you have to do. Annie Dillard talks about writing a novel and then just cut the first 3 chapters. Right. So you've got to hold your work loosely. And another way that you may need to hold your work loosely is, even though I know I said that there is maybe this one project that you just must do, and that's when you've been working on and you haven't been able to finish it, that may not actually be the thing that you're supposed to be working on. So if you're sensing movement elsewhere, if you're sensing a call to write something else, but you have this darling project, you may have to loosen your grip on that darling and do the thing that maybe that other thing that God is calling you to do. Okay, moving along. The the 8th thing is to think outside the desk. Maybe what's blocking you is that you feel like, oh, Sarah's on a desk, or you already do, and sitting down at it is just not doing it for you. I have written books at my desk, at my husband's desk, at another desk, on the couch, on the bed. At one point, I was really stuck in a project and I moved into the dining room and wrote like with everything going on all around me and my headset in. And it was just like there's just chaos everywhere all the time. And that's just kind of what I needed, I guess. And so I heard of one writer who, when he would get stuck in his writing, he would get up, he would leave the house, he would walk around the block, and then he'd come rushing in the door like he had just had a breakthrough and he needed to write right now. And he would sit down and he would write as fast as he could, you know, like pretending to himself that he had just like unblocked himself by doing that walk. And sometimes it may be that you have to do something else other than writing for a while. You have to maybe work on something other than the work in order to get back into working on the work. And for some of us, it's going to be something that's kind of like, you know, you don't use your brain to do it, like take a shower, do the laundry, walk around the block, do something else. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I will often have really great insights into my novel when I'm not actually writing it, when I'm folding socks, of which there are billions in my house, and they're all very small. So I do a lot of sock folding, and I often will be like, oh, that's how I need to solve that problem. So think outside the desk. Okay, number 9 is to write as if you're someone else. Okay, this may sound a little bizarre, but let me give you an example. So sometimes people will say you need to like turn off your inner editor in order to be able to keep writing. And that's certainly true for me. But sometimes I have to forget that I'm myself entirely in order to do the writing. Like I have to think that maybe just pretend I'm Frederick Buechner or Anne Lamott and be like, I'm going to do this, right? So there was this one time when I was in undergrad that a guest musician came to our school, and he said, well, how many of you are opera singers? And of course, nobody raised their hands. And he said, well, I would like you to sing this particular line of a song. So we all were singing. I don't know if it was a stanza from a hymn or something. He's like, that's pretty good. Now I want you to sing this like you're opera singers. And so we did that same stanza, that same verse again, like we were opera singers. And friends, it sounded like opera singers. Like this whole auditorium was full of opera singers because we were all pretending to be opera singers. We had it in us to make those kinds of sounds, but we never thought of ourselves as opera singers, right? So what if you're Anne Lamott? She's going to be like, no, don't say that. I'm saying, what if you're Anne Lamott? What if you are Anne Patchett and you're going to write bel canto right now? Well, how would you write it? It's an ancient principle of studying under a master, of actually duplicating what they do and learning how their instincts work so that eventually you can begin to improvise in your own way. Eventually you can begin to improvise. A little tip with that is that I know this is going to sound weird, but I will often read my stuff aloud while I'm editing it. I'll read it in a British accent because when you do that, all the awkward sentence construction becomes really apparent because you're like, yeah, Lady Mary would never say it that way. Just, read it aloud in a British accent and all of the awkwardness will become immediately apparent. Okay, all right, finally, my final tip, and I could probably do a dozen more, but you need to give yourself permission to pick the low-hanging fruit while it's ripe. So yes, there are moments of inspiration where it's just, you suddenly know exactly what you need to write and how to write it. You're in that, what John Gardner calls that vivid dream, that vivid continuous dream. You need to give yourself permission to do that. When a farmer's strawberries are in, she doesn't apologize to everybody like, sorry, I have to go pick strawberries now. They understand, like, go pick the strawberries. The harvest is happening. And there are times when you need to harvest words and you need to do it now. You need to take a personal day. You need to go on a retreat. You need to, get up early in the morning and stay up really late at night and eat badly. And, whatever it is to get this out, there is the moment where when you're done, you can be like, yeah, I felt like a writer, man. That's what that was about. It happens like once a decade. just to let you know. It happens every once in a while, but you need to give yourself permission, whatever it takes to do that. I have a friend who is an educator, and he wrote a book on preventing school shootings in like 3 weeks. Super thoroughly researched book. He had been speaking on this topic, and all of a sudden it all came out of him. But he had to say no to a whole bunch of other stuff. He went without sleep. He ate terribly. He felt like awful physically afterwards, but he had a finished book. And I was really impressed that he knew to say no to a lot of other things in order to get that book done. So those are my 10 tips. I hope you've been taking notes. And then I hope that going into the rest of this week, you will, my challenge to you is to look at that list and be like, okay, what are the 2 to 3 things on this list that I really resonate with? These 2 or 3 things that I can integrate right now, whether it's setting a deadline or what are those things, and go ahead and start to implement those things over the course of this month of September. And by October 1st, see where you are. Maybe by then one person has asked you, how is the writing going? Yes, that was one of your goals, right? So what are those 1 or 2 things? We're going to do the Q&A. I went over time a little bit, but I'd like to read to you from At the Still Point. This looks backwards on my screen, sorry, which is one of the literary guides to prayer that I've done. This one is for ordinary time, and this prayer is from John Milton. Actually, I don't think it's a prayer. I think it's just a poem from John Milton, 17th century British poet, and I'm going to leave you with this. He says, "When I consider how my light is spent, ere half my days in this dark world and wide, and that one talent which is death to hide, lodged with me useless, though my soul more bent to serve therewith my Maker and present my true account, lest he returning chide, doth God exact day labor, light denied? I finally ask, but patience, to prevent that murmur, soon replies, God doth not need either man's work or his gifts. Who best bear his mild yoke, they serve him best. His state is kingly, thousands at his bidding speed, and post over land and ocean without rest. They also serve who only stand and wait." So may you get your writing done.
Well, thank you, Sarah. That was just excellent. Talk about some very practical pieces of advice. I'm sure that those are things that many people can use.
Me too. Preach it to the choir.
Yes. So now let's open it up for questions. If anyone would like to ask Sarah a question, what we'll do is ask you to type it into your chat box and those questions to ask Sarah. Why don't we start off, Sarah, with talking about publishers? Kind of another practical aspect of, being an author.
Okay.
How have you chosen the different publishing companies that you've worked with? Because you've worked with more than one, and you've worked with different types of books. So can you talk a little bit about, how you've done that?
Yeah. Well, my first book came out with Tyndale in 2003, and it's kind of a magical story. I went to a writers' conference. I met an editor there. We connected about another project where they needed writers, and it was just a work for hire, which means they just pay you a set fee and you turn it in, and the copyright isn't even under your name. Your name may be on it, but through the process of doing that, I then had an idea for the book Walking with Frodo, which was a devotional journey through the Lord of the Rings. And I pitched that to them because I already had a relationship with that editor. And, so in it, there was a way in which they chose me. So there's a lot of kind of magic in that, just because of the different editors that I met with. But I will say that before I went to the writing conferences, and I've been to many, I do my homework on who's going to be there. I look through their catalogs and what they're producing, and I craft my pitches specifically for their publishing company. I may change subtly, like the wording and everything, to be specific to them. So I've worked with the Upper Room, with Paraclete Press. Paraclete came to me because Lauren Winner, who's one of their authors, was my professor at Duke, and she recommended me to them. So in a lot of ways, they chose me, and the doors opened, and I just followed those doors. So.
Well, that's excellent. I think it's really good advice to be well prepared going into a writing conference or other
Yes.
event where you're going to meet
Yes.
important people who are relevant to your career.
Right. I mean, they have branded themselves in a particular way, and you're not going to get them to change their brand. Like if they don't publish memoirs, you're not going to suddenly get them to change their mind about that. So you really need to do your homework going in. I'm getting a lot of private questions. So
Yeah,
we may, I don't know if people want to change their setting as they're writing a question.
no, it's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
Sarah, that's the way that it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
So let
Okay.
me ask you one of them, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think was a good question from Tesha, which is, how do you deal with rejection?
Oh, yeah. Because that can really stall you out. That can take the wind out of your sails. You may be totally on fire with a book, and then, or an article, or even a blog post, and then you get feedback that's negative, and you find you haven't written something for 2 months after that. Well, I have a folder that it's 2 folders now, over 15 years of that I call kudos. Those are my kudos folder. And I print off every kind thing that anyone has ever said about my writing. Feedback from readers, comments from blog posts, all of that. And I put it in that folder. And over 15 years, I have now 2, file folders stuffed full. I have letters from teenagers, working moms, people in youth ministry. And that's, so like when I'm really in a funk, I go back to those. Because that's just reminds me of why I'm doing what I do. So that's one way. But then I also recognize it's part of holding your work loosely. There's always a little bit of truth, and sometimes a lot of truth in the feedback that we get. So I think of my writing, especially if I'm working with an editor, I think of the project I'm working on as a puzzle, and I'm contributing many of the pieces, but I'm not contributing all of the pieces. The editors are contributing some pieces to the puzzle too. And the ultimate image of what that puzzle is going to be may not look exactly like what I thought. And that's part of the kind of fun process, if you're willing to relinquish your work, is to see what that image is going to look like, and to say, I got to be part of that. I got to be a big part of that. And that's a lesson, a schooling in humility, among other things.
I've talked to other authors, and they say the same thing. I mean, having a valuable editor is just, a really important part of the writing process. So I think that give and take that you're describing makes a lot of sense to many folks.
Yeah, sure. Right.
So here's another good one. Do you think of yourself as writing first for yourself, or do you write for a specific audience?
Oh, like if writing is cathartic, or I need to write because it helps me spiritually or something. I would say for a good chunk of my life, it was certainly true that I needed to write just to maintain my sense of who I was as a person. And I needed to write in order as a kind of spiritual discipline, right, to spend time with God. And that's certainly been true since I've been published, but there's also, now this is really odd. I don't think I write very often, unless it's because I know it's gonna be, somebody needs it. So there is a way that I'm writing for my audience, but I never want to take a project that's going to bore me. I want to write because I have a particular audience in mind, but I also want to write because it's meaningful to me.
So here's another good question from Carrie. When you started writing, when did you consider yourself as a writer with a capital W?
Yeah.
As opposed to
a hobby writer.
Small W, yeah.
Yeah.
Was there a threshold that you felt you passed to some level of legitimacy or renown?
No. You asked me in 7th grade, what do you I would probably say teacher first, but then I'd be like, but secretly, I really want to be a writer. I remember like repeating the titles of books to myself as a kid and the authors' names, Zilpha Keatley Snyder and Scott Odell and Madeline L'Engle and Laura Ingalls Wilder. Like I didn't just remember the titles of books. I remembered the authors and thought, this is what I want to be. And so I've always thought of myself as a writer, legitimate writer, even before I ever saw my name in a and first published things were I was a staff writer for a newspaper. And so my grandfather was like, look at your name in this newspaper. You wrote this. And I was like, yeah, I did. Because that's what I do.
Great that you had that level of self-confidence kind of at a young age of your career.
Yeah, who knows where that came from, because I didn't in many other areas of my life. So, but lots of encouragement too from grown-ups. I mean, people who saw that in me pretty early on and encouraged me.
So here's a good question from Kristen. How do you decide how much of your book you share publicly on your blog or on Facebook before it's published in its entirety?
Oh, okay. So not just how much to share just of my own life or self.
No, more specifically, I think the question is around, content on your book.
Content.
How much do you feel comfortable with giving snippets away in advance of the book showing up?
Yeah. I don't blog. There are other people that might be really good at answering that question. Jonathan Merritt. Actually, there are a number of us at the Buechner conference who were talking about this, just like some of the presenters around ice cream one night. Because I was like, Jonathan, how do you some of that, I have a hard time giving away my words for free. So if you go to my website, I blog like 6 times a year. It's very rare. And so that's a good question for a real blogger. But so I have my co-author of our next book coming out. My next book coming out is with Erin Wassinger, and she's a good friend, journalist, writer, freelance. She freelances from home like I do with small kids. And our book is called The Year of Small Things, Radical Faith for the Rest of Us. It's coming out from Brazos Press. It's unlike anything else I've done before. And right now we're building that website, youreofsmallthings.com. It's not live yet, but we're building it, and we're pulling material that didn't end up in the book. And we're going to be turning those into blog posts that we're going to roll out in advance of the book. But there's tons of material. I mean, like for every book I've written, there's usually a document with like 10 to 20,000 words or more that were cut. All of that is material that we plan to use in our blog.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe one thing that we should touch on, at least briefly, is another writing conference that we're going to do together.
Yeah.
This one is an in-person writing conference in Western Michigan in May of 2017.
My home state. I'm excited.
So we are planning a Writing for Your Life in-person writing conference at Western Theological Seminary and Hope College in May of 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And Sarah is going to be not only one of our breakout session speakers, but she's also going to be doing an advanced workshop in conjunction with that. So I know it's a little bit early, Sarah, but you want to talk a little bit about what you're going to be doing in that advanced workshop?
Yeah. And I'll try to be mindful of our time. But the Advanced Writers course will be the day before. We're hoping the day before the conference kicks off, and the way we did this at the Frederick Buechner Writers Workshop at Princeton was we invited people to apply for that and register for that once they had registered for the conference. And it was really people who are ready to take their writing to the next level, who are beginning to realize that beyond questions of calling and actually getting the writing done, what are the next steps for building your platform as a writer? That's a big word in publishing right now. What is the platform by which your voice will be amplified to as many people as possible? How do you build that platform and take yourself seriously enough as a writer to be intentional about that? And so it's going to be kind of, some of it are vocational questions, like what are your 3 to 5 year goals? Where do you see yourself 10 years from now as a writer? And actually having a chart where we write out like what is my mission and vision as a writer? What products am I projects am I bringing to what audience and why? And then what are my goals and how am I going to go after those goals?
So a question from Jennifer is, when are the exact dates for the May conference? And so let me answer that. As Sarah is mentioning, our preliminary plan is to have the one-day advanced workshop that Sarah will be leading on May 15th, and then the main two-day conference on May 16th and 17th of 2017.
Right.
But
so it's midweek. It's not a weekend. It's midweek.
Right. And all of you who have registered for these webinars will be on the mailing list to get more information about that when we're ready to open registration and have more details. There is one other detail that I can share about that, and that is our keynote speakers for that event will be Barbara Brown Taylor and Rachel Held Evans.
I know. So, I'm fangirling big time about this.
So we're quite pleased with having them available for that conference. And as many of you know, Rachel will be speaking at this conference this evening at 8 o'clock. So I hope that you can all join us for that. I think we've gone over the hour, but Sarah, are you up for a couple more questions? People can stay on if they're...
yeah, if you would like to stay on, that'd be fine. And if you need to log off or whatever, I think that'd be fine too. People are free to go if they want to. And then I can also, I was just looking, some of these questions are great. It would take a while to answer them all, but I could possibly pick like my top 2 or 3 and respond to some of them as a blog post. You're actually talking me into giving away my words. Whew.
There you go. Sounds like a great blog post. So another question is, let me go down the list here. Oh yeah, how do you balance between reading time and preparation for writing and then writing itself?
Yeah. Whenever I'm stuck in the writing, I give myself permission to do research, right? So I wrote a book called Dating Mr. Darcy, which was a book for teen girls on navigating dating and romance. And of course, my research for that was to watch all of the Jane Austen movies that have ever been produced. And to read all of the novels and to read Jane Austen's letters and to read the Oxford Companion to Jane Austen. I mean, I just went like, I just went crazy with all the research that you can do for writing a book like that. But I think it was a much richer book. And I finally got to the point where I was like, I have to fill up the well of resources for myself before I have anything to pour out for anyone else. And sometimes right now, I'm writing a young adult fantasy novel and I'm reading fantasy, but I'm reading like old fairy tales, like the Andrew Lang, English fairy tales, French fairy tales. And that's all. I don't feel badly about that. Now, I don't read those during prime writing time, which is for me usually between about 8 and 11 in the morning. I read in the evening, usually once the boys are in bed, or at lunchtime if I need a break.
So another question is, how do you keep the calling alive, for your writing, knowing that there's a possibility that what you're working on may not get published?
Yeah, that is the biggest question for me with my fiction, since I've never crossed over, since I haven't yet crossed over into fiction. And yeah, it's such a, this is where we get all kinds of junior high, like I don't know, everything about, that my self-doubt comes up with that question. But I have to keep in mind that there is that part of writing where I am doing this because, one, it's a way to honor the maker who made me this way. It's a way to bring glory to God. And 2, because I can't not write. So there's part of me that, yes, this surges up in me that I need to do this. And and I think that, so what comes to mind is the carvers in the cathedral, those medieval cathedrals, who would carve elaborately, obviously in places that people would see. But in some of those medieval cathedrals in Europe, if you put your hand behind the pillars that are up against the walls, you can feel carvings back there too, even though they knew no one would ever see those. And those are done because we can, and they're done to glorify God, who is the witness of those beautiful works. And that's, I mean, when I was a kid, that's why I wrote fiction. I didn't want anyone on the bus to see what I was writing. That was mine, and it was for me, and it was because that's who God made me. And I think that's why I keep writing fiction. And I got to finish it, doggone it. And I got to do that for me, because that's a life goal. I mean, if nothing else happens with it, I got to do that for me and my sons. I want them to read one of my novels someday.
Well, good for you, Sarah. I think that that's a wonderful way to think about it. And a wonderful example, too, with the carvings.
Sure.
So, Sarah, this has been really wonderful. I appreciate you joining us so much. Thank you to everyone who was attending. And as I said earlier, stay tuned for Rachel Held Evans this evening at 8 o'clock.
Thank you, Brian. It's been fun, everybody. Have a great rest of the week. And you can get your writing done. You really can.
All right. Thanks a lot, Sarah.
All right. Take care.